Howdy folks, and welcome to the video for the French premium tier 6 aircraft carrier, the Béarn. So, aircraft carriers are really annoying, right? And the Béarn is a particularly effective aircraft carrier. Therefore, it is by definition even more annoying. The Béarn is the ultimate team play aircraft carrier, and I think it is incredibly good at winning games. Now, in a lot of those games, you're not going to get amazing stats, at least on paper. But my win rate in the Béarn is really high. And I think if you absolutely had to win a game, this is honestly one of the probably top 10 ships in the game I would pick to do it. Like if you had actual money on the line, you know, like a game of pool at a dingy bar at 2 a.m., and the guy lays $20 down on the table and says you need to win the next game of World of Warships, the Béarn is one of the ones I would pick. Because if you know what to do and you know how to play the Béarn, which is not exactly rocket science, although I do think it takes a little skill, then you absolutely can get an edge in almost every game. Unless it's one of those rare games that doesn't have destroyers. Because what the Béarn is absolutely best at is spotting and dealing with destroyers. And there's a few reasons for that. One is because the planes are relatively quick and have relatively high HP. But by far the most important thing about the Béarn, which makes it almost unique, I believe, among all aircraft carriers in the game, are the fighters. So for most aircraft carriers, fighters are a little bit of an afterthought. I mean, they're a thing, and smart aircraft carrier players know how to use them to some effectiveness, but they're usually pretty easy to skirt around. They don't last very long, and they're notoriously famous for being paper thin and easy to shoot down. Pause for a moment on that thought while we explore the other reason the Béarn is really good at dealing with DDs, which are these HE bombs. And in particular, the fact that you can basically drop them directly on top of destroyers. Now, in that case, that destroyer knew how to avoid them and knew how to maneuver, and he also got a little bit lucky. That is not going to last. It is almost impossible to ultimately avoid taking some damage from Béarn HE bombers. And of course, even if you don't damage them yourself, then you're getting a lot of spotting damage in on destroyers, which is a great way to win games. But anyway, back to the other unique thing about the Béarn. Well, I guess the HE bombers aren't unique. Back to the unique thing about the Béarn, which are the fighters. So on the Béarn, the fighters are supercharged. First of all, you get 8 charges per type of plane. And you have 2 types of planes, so you get a total of 16 charges. The reload is lower on them. The duration is much longer on them. And most importantly, they have a massive number of hit points relative to normal fighters. They can be shot down, but they rarely get shot down. Also, I believe you get more planes, more fighters in the group, which not only improves their survivability, but also means that if a squadron enters the radius of your fighters, they're just all going to get shot down. In fact, sometimes they all get shot down and there's fighters left over for another squadron. So basically, the fighters in the Béarn are just really, really, really good. And that means a couple things. It means that you can deny the enemy's planes access to your destroyers, assuming the destroyers cooperate and stay in a certain area. And it means that you can use those fighters to spot enemy destroyers, and it's incredibly powerful. Now, having said all that, I'm recording this video in February of 2026. There keep being all kinds of rumors and blog posts and devlogs that say that wargaming is going to change a lot of things about aircraft carriers, and my understanding is one of the things they're going to change is that fighters won't be able to spot. That will be big for all aircraft carriers, but it's going to be really huge for the Béarn, to the point where I really wonder if they're going to have to rejigger or buff the Béarn in some way, because it might just not be very good if they completely take the fighters away. I mean, this is an okay aircraft carrier, you're still going to get these really good HE bombers and HE bombs. Is that enough to make the Bearn worth playing? I don't know. But the Bearn is uniquely dependent on its fighters for its game impact. So that change is going to uniquely impact the Bearn. So, yeah, I mean, basically, in 80% of the games I play in the Bearn, I'm able to almost single-handedly neutralize the enemy destroyers while also protecting my own destroyers. And that's basically what you see me doing in this game. I'm not going to spend much time at all doing anything except just absolutely tormenting the enemy destroyers and trying to protect my own destroyers, and a little bit of spotting on everybody else. But I don't think I'm going to launch very many attacks on any other kind of ship. I will say the Bearn is a little bit less awesome when it does have to act like a more normal aircraft carrier. In particular, it doesn't have torpedo planes at all, which is the main way of doing damage against battleships. It does have AP bombs, which can be very effective, kind of a la Malta style, on certain battleships. But that's a little iffier. Normally, in most games I play within the Bearn, it doesn't even get to that point. Like, it's like this game. It just winds up being a little bit of a blowout, because what happens is, and obviously it's not just me, the other aircraft carriers also helping out, and there's a lot of other things going on, so I'm not saying I single-handedly won this game, but the Bearn gives your team just a huge edge. When you launch into World of Warships in a destroyer in tier 6 or 7, first of all, you're already in trouble because the destroyers suck, as we've been covering lately. And the Bearn just removes your last hope. Like, playing in a tier 6 destroyer in a game where the enemy has a Bearn and knows how to use it and knows how to drive it is just a miserable experience, which is bad for the game. Don't get me wrong. Like, I hope they do nerf the Bearn. I don't need to have this experience at the cost of, players and destroyers. Hopefully there's a way to do it and still make the Bearn special and unique and fun. I do think it's fine for the Bearn to be more effective at dealing with destroyers, just as it's kind of like unique gimmick. If all aircraft carriers just become kind of less effective, there's the AP bombs. You see, that's a nice drop. But you see, I'm not doing very much damage in this game. That's just not, that often happens when I pilot Bearn. I just don't get a lot of damage because I'm not really trying to do damage. I mean, I'm trying to do small bits of damage to the enemy destroyers, but mostly I'm just spotting them and spotting everybody and also protecting my DDs. So I usually get a lot of XP, and I usually do well in the XP column, but I don't get very good PR, but I get a really good win rate. Anyway, back to what I was saying. I hope they do make all aircraft carriers less effective at spotting and dealing with destroyers, but I hope they keep the Bearn as one of the best at it relative to the other aircraft carriers, because otherwise, what's the point of it existing? Like, this is what it does, right? It torments Vakellans. That's what this ship is all about. Another 2 hits, another 2,400 damage, and 2 fires, which of course he DCP'd. Of course, the more important thing here is the spotting. There are some games where I just get lucky with the HE bombs, and also maybe the enemy destroyer doesn't know how they work, and I'm able to do serious amounts of damage to the destroyers myself. But to be clear, most of it is about spotting and letting your enemies take care of the DDs. The only time I really get stymied is when there's a really good destroyer player in certain destroyers, like the Jupiter 42 is actually notoriously one of them, where it has smokes. Smokes are a problem. You can't spot what you can't see. And I have played in games where, like, again, there is some counterplay. The unfortunate fact, of course, in terms of game balance is that counterplay isn't very fun for the enemy destroyer. We've talked about that before, but it's worth mentioning that even when you do successfully counterplay, it mostly consists of like hiding from the aircraft carrier a lot until they get bored. One thing that can happen in other aircraft carriers is that you get deplaned, but that's really hard to do to a Béarn. It gets a good number of planes, and the planes have a lot of HP, and it's just, you know, not an easy thing to do. I've had it happen. I have lost games in the Béarn, of course, but other than the ones where I've just made a mistake, it's usually one of two things: either like a really good destroyer player who knows how to like maneuver around me, or I'm playing against an enemy Béarn who's even better than I am, or sometimes you spawn into a game where there's no destroyers, and in that case the Béarn is significantly less valuable, because now you're kind of reduced to acting more like just a normal aircraft carrier, and you're not bad at it, but this is not the one if what you wanted was good damage numbers and good kills, the Béarn is not what I would pick. The HE bombs are a little bit underwhelming against bigger, well-armored targets, and you don't get any torpedoes, and so then you're relying on the AP bombs, and they're all right, but AP bombs in general are just not quite as effective as torpedoes. You don't get the floods, for one thing. So yeah, I mean, it's an okay aircraft carrier in that case, but it's just, you know, what this is really for is tormenting DDs. So the more DDs, the better. So yeah, pretty much most games I play in the Béarn go exactly like this one. They turn into relatively blowouts, and I don't get a ton of damage, but I get a lot of wins, and I get a good bit of XP. Let's see, we did 1250 in this game, so that's a pretty average Béarn game for me. So that's the Béarn, a very annoying aircraft carrier to play against. I'll see you guys in the next video.